This is chapter 11, which deals with retirement planning, which is a key part of what you would be doing as a financial planner. And as an individual, if you're not going to be a financial planner, what you should be thinking about to be financially independent so that you can possibly stop working whenever you want. So there's always articles in the news that look something like this. About one in how many US adults over 50 say they expect to never retire. 1 in 4. Pretty sad. 25% of Americans think they're never going to be able to afford to retire. Hopefully you will not be in that boat. Another study says 55-year-old Americans are critically underprepared for retirement. So this is where you come in to help people figure out what they need to do. So on your sheet there, you'll see that some more kind of depressing stats. But so to be financially prepared for retirement means we need to have enough assets, and we need to have an investment plan and a plan for taking distributions from our savings. So how much do you need, and how much do I have to invest to get there, and then how much am I going to have to take out? Okay. Few Americans accurately estimated how much retirement income would be generated from a $100,000 nest egg. Okay. For example, they were asked, if you're retired at age 67 with $100,000, how much income do you think you would be able to take out annually from those savings? So you guys remember we've talked about it numerous times, what percentage of 100,000, if that's what you had at the end, could you take out roughly each year? Hopefully you remember it was like 4%. So 4% means $4,000. That would be about it, which would be right in here. Look at the amount that people thought they would be able to take out, like 10,000, 25,000. You take out 25,000, you're going to last like 4 years. So that's another problem. People just don't have a clue about how money works, what kind of returns they can get, and so on. So as you can see, there are numerous factors that affect retirement planning. How many more years you have left to work, how much money you have, how much money you think you're going to need from what you make, what your assumptions are in terms of inflation, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, so we're going to talk about a lot of those. So just some definitions. Work-life expectancy is the period of time a person is expected to be in the workforce. So how long are you going to work? And then how much time prior to retirement do you have left? Okay? So you guys haven't started yet, so you're going to maybe work 20 to 40. 20 to 60. That's 40 years. If you're right here at age 50, then you have 10 years left. So this is the 40, and this is the 10 right there. So these are important numbers to remember. Under Social Security, you can begin receiving benefits at age 62. That's a very important number. All financial planners need to know that. 62. But if you do that, you do not get your full benefits. So you really want to wait until you are 67 until you get your full benefits. A number I did not put on here is that you have to take your benefits when you turn 70, which if you can wait until you're 70, that is the best deal, because each year in between here, between all of these, your Social Security amount goes up. Okay? A lot of people talking about Social Security running out. Yes, and that's possibly like in the early 30s. It doesn't mean run out, you don't get any money. It means that you would probably get about 80% of what you were supposed to get. So hopefully the government will fix it so it's not that bad. Okay, another term, if you will, retirement life expectancy. So it's pretty straightforward. How much life do you have in retirement. Okay? So if you retire at 60 and you live to 90, you would have 30 years. Here's the tables, life expectancy tables, and I want you to just kind of get an idea of how these work. So this says that if you were born today, okay, the 0 right there, if you're a male, you're expected to live to about 73, 74. If you're a female, to 79. If you are 20 years old right now, there's 20. You take 20 and you add it on to 54. So guys, you're expected to live to 74. Girls, about 80. If you're, let's just keep going up here. If you're 50 years old, so now you've made it past a lot, you haven't been in any car accidents yet, so your chances of living longer are a little bit better. You can live up to 78. If you're 60 years old, you're expected to live to 80. If you are 70, 83. If you are 80, about 88, and so on. So that's how the life expectancy tables work. So if you run out of money, okay, so proper planning is needed because there is a risk of running out of money. That's why we try to be conservative and say you're gonna live to your 90 or 93. But if you run out of money, very bad situation, that is a term that's called superannuation. Superannuation, okay? So retirees have multiple sources to get their income from. There they all are. We'll talk about this later. So we often talk about how much do you have to save. Well, if you want to get very specific, of course it would matter what is your rate of return, and it would matter of how many years are you going to do it. So if you've got 40 years until retirement, which is what all of you should be thinking, 40 years, and you could make like 7 to 8%, it's conservative return, you should be looking at like 12 to 15% that you should be saving. If you're like, you know what, I'm going to procrastinate until I'm like 50, and then you think I got to start saving enough to retire, you actually have to start saving more than what you earn, which is going to be impossible. So the longer you wait, the greater percentage you have to invest each year. So there's no way you want to live out here putting that much money away. Okay? So, moral of the story, start early. When we talk about savings rate, it's simply the percentage of your personal income. And I think right now in America it's around like 3%, like 3%. But you should always be thinking of like 10 to 13% is kind of the number. Whenever I talk about it in class, that's the number we should be looking at. This is just a benchmark. I'm not going to quiz you on this. We've talked about this before. It's simply saying, for example, if you're 65, you should have like 20 to 1 in terms of how much your assets are compared to your gross pay. So if you're making 100,000, you should have 20 times that on top. That would be 2 million, and that would equal 20. So if you're making 100,000 and you're 65, you should have saved 2 million. If you're 25 and you're making 100,000, you should have saved 0.2 or $20,000. Okay? So over time, this number should grow to there. These are just rough rules of thumb to help when a client comes in, you can say, here's about where you should be. So you've seen this in Finance 3000. It's the power of compounding of money. So Lori saves $5,000 a year from 25 to 34. So that's basically 10 years. She's making 8%. She stops investing at 34. At age 6, and she keeps it in there, continually making 8%. So she invests, basically, she deposits $50,000, 10 years of 5,000. She would have about $750,000. Here's Peter, who saves the same 5,000 a year, and he starts when she stops from 35 to 65, does it for 30 years, which means he puts in $150,000 or $100,000 more. how much will he have? He will have accumulated $162,000 less than what Lori did. Here are the numbers. Lori put in only 50 grand. She has 728. Peter put in 150. He has only 566. Why? Because of the time value of money. Lori started much earlier. There's just another way of showing those numbers. All right. So an investment plan must take into consideration, we talked about this last chapter, how much risk tolerance a person has, as well as their time horizon. So their portfolio is very much impacted by those two factors. When you're young, you should be mostly in stocks because you can afford more risk because you have a lot more time. This is a minor thing, but when we're talking about numbers, we usually deal with pre-tax numbers. Just a kind of a minor thing. But when we talk about tax advantaged accounts, there's a lot of tax deferred things going on with IRAs and 401ks that we want to make sure our clients have appropriate amount of money in those so they don't have to pay a lot of money in taxes now when they're making good money. So once again, IRA versus 401k. IRA stands for individual retirement account. So you start it, you set it up. 401k, your employer starts it. They create it, they may contribute, they almost always do. You put a % of your paycheck in it, and then all of the money from both of these goes into investments. You get tax advantages, and you ideally will build your wealth. Inflation can have a big impact on our savings and so on. So remember that inflation impacts our purchasing power. So it's wise to conservatively, you'll see this term a lot, conservatively estimate inflation. That means whenever, if you guys remember, whenever you're doing like a business forecast, the forecast, you would make sure your sales are maybe lower than expected and your expenses are higher. So with inflation, maybe a little bit higher, with earnings rates a little bit lower. Here's what inflation has been since 1965 up until now. Blue and red is simply the difference between food and energy being included, but they're fairly similar. And you can see here, this line this is 2.5 line there, which is about the average when you go across here. It's been about 3%, I think, over the last 50 years. And going forward, that's 2.5 to 3% is what most financial packages will forecast. So when a person retires, they have a lot of decreasing expenses, but some things go up. For example, they might want to go on vacation more. They have more hobbies. They want to have a second home. They got to pay more for health care, support their adult children, etc., etc. But a lot of things also go down. Those are there all on your sheet. You can read those. So the question is, okay, if these are going down, some are going up, what percent of my income do I need when I'm going into retirement? Well, most of the time, you don't need as much. So these tend to outweigh these. Okay? That percentage is what we call the wage replacement ratio. It represents the amount of money needed in retirement. Okay? So if a person's making $100,000 and they need only $80,000 in their first year of retirement, then their ratio is 80%. As simple as that. Generally, most individuals need less. Okay? I'm not going to worry about that slide. Okay, calculating the wage replacement ratio. The book talks about a bottoms-up approach, a top-down approach. Bottoms-up just means they're looking at kind of a budgeting model where you look at every expense. Many financial planners I should say, conclude that most people need about 70 to 80% of their pre-retirement income. And here you can see, here's average annual expenditures by income and age. So here's income, here's expenditures. So if you just look at the blue here, you'll see as we get older. So this is, like when you're in your 40s, and basically 40s and 50s is when your expenditures are at their peak. As you get older, you don't have as much spend on with kids and housing and so on, so it goes down. So once again, sources of retirement income, Social Security. A lot of people think I'm going to get most of my money from Social Security. Pension income, almost no one gets that unless you're in the government anymore. Used to be a lot of companies have, but not anymore. This is like your do-it-yourself. This is what all of you need to be doing for the rest of your life, is this area right here. You can't do much about that. You're probably not even going to get that. This is if you want to continue working after retirement, it's up to you. But this is the big thing all of you need to be doing, and as financial planners tell your clients. So how much do Americans typically get from all of these? Okay. So there's Social Security. You basically get a third of your income from Social Security. That's on average. Okay. Here's for people that are working, pensions, asset income, and so on. So you need a mix of all of these to be able to retire well. This is, once again, I'm not going to quiz you on this, but Social Security is really much more beneficial to people that aren't making a lot of money. So this is earnings. These are like people in poverty right here. So if you're in poverty, you're going to pretty much stay in poverty when you retire, and Social Security is going to make up most of the money that you get. If you're doing pretty well in life and you're making $200,000, then when you retire, your Social Security is going to make up only about 19-20% of your retirement income, because you just don't get near as much back as what you've been putting in and so on. Okay, so how do we figure out retirement funding? There's a number of different models. This is the only one we're going to do. It's the basic annuity model. And we have to make assumptions for basically all of this stuff that we've just talked about. Try to forecast conservatively. Okay? So because small changes in these assumptions can create big time variations. So, earnings rate, if you did 7 versus 9, can make a huge difference. Okay, so here are the steps that we're going to take to calculate these. These are also in your book. You can go through them, but I got them here on the slide. So here are the variables. They're there on your page. We're on page 3. The very bottom of page 3. There's Jordan. He makes $70,000, or she, I'm sorry. She expects to need 80% of her salary when she retires. Assume inflation is 3%. She's going to make 9.5. Once again, these are all assumptions. Remember, we're making assumptions. She would like to retire at 62. We're going to assume she's going to live to 90. She's calculated, because Social Security will tell you how much to expect, that in today's dollars, she would be making about $15,000 from Social Security. So you say, okay, so how much do you need? So she's making $70,000. She's going to need 80% of that. There's 56. She's going to get Social Security of 15. So amount needed in today's dollars is $41,000 a year. So now let's inflate this at 3%. There's all your time value of money variables on your calculator, and we get a future value of $74,000. So $41,000 today is equivalent to $74,000 when she needs to retire, her first year of retirement. And so we need a 74 at the beginning of the period. So we're going to put the calculator into begin mode, because it is an annuity due. And we're going to say, okay, if you need 74,000 and you are going to live from 62 to 90, you need that for 28 years. We want the 74 to go up by inflation each year during those times. So our IY is a little bit more complicated. We have to say, okay, how much are we think we're going to make? We're going to make 9.5%, which is pretty high in retirement. And the inflation rate is going to be 3%. So this is like an inflation adjusted rate of return. We did this in the previous chapter. So 1.95 divided 103 minus 1, we get an IY of 6.3. And that gives us a present value at 62 of $1 million. Okay, so that's what we need at 62. So how much would be saved? So now that becomes the future value. And 20 years from now, if we're making this rate of return, we would need to have annual savings of $18,894. Those would be constant savings. Okay? That would be your answer. Calculate, so this is a new problem, number 2 on the top of page 4. Calculate the amount that she must have at the end of each year, assuming she presently has 50,000 already today. So that means that you basically can take 50,000 away from the need. So the future value still stays the same, the number of years stay the same, the IY stays the same. But today, present value, we have 50,000 already. So we're putting that in as a negative because we're saying we don't need that anymore. This is what we need, the 1 million. We've already got 50,000. And then when we calculate payment, that means that our annual savings went from 18,000 down to 13,000 because we've got 50,000 working for us to go there. Okay. And by the way, this is an ordinary annuity, so you needed to make sure your calculator is back in end mode. If it stayed in beginning, which I assume it did, if you didn't change it, then you would have gotten a slightly different answer. Okay, so remember, these are constant amounts. And if you think about it, in real life, you're probably not going to put the exact same amount in every year as you work and you get raises. So a more realistic way of doing the calculation is what we call the serial payment. Serial simply means that we're going to increase the savings amount each year. And if you think about it, you're going to typically get a raise of, who knows, anywhere from 3 to 5% on average. And therefore you should be able to save more each year. So how do we adjust? Well, we're going to take this 1 million is still going to be our need. It's still going to be 20 years from now. We're still going to make 9.5%. Okay. And the present value, our first calculation is what is the present value? How much do we need in today's terms? So we calculate the present value. We would need to have 166,000 in today's terms. But we don't want to know how much we want to put in just today. We want to know in how much we want to have in like payments over time. So the way you do this calculation is a little bit different. First difference was we calculated different present value. Okay, so now we clear all that out. Now we put in, this is our present value. For 20 years, we're going to do a different IY that's going to be adjusted for how much we're going to increase her savings amount by 8% a year. So we're going to adjust our IY again. This time it's going to be, here's our rate of return, and here's how much we're going to increase the payment each year. This is like also what we call a growing annuity. So the IY now becomes that. We do the calculation, payment, regular annuity is now 95.92. So notice what happens. We went from going back to 18,000, and this one starts off with 9,000, but it's going to go up 8% from this point each year. So each year is going to get more and more and more, which is a more likely situation. So this is simply the first payment, and it's not going to be constant. It's going to rise each year by 8%. Okay? So whenever you do retirement planning, you don't always just say okay, what if inflation was just 3% and you just left it at that? Because what's often going to happen is your client's going to say, I'd like to retire when I'm 60. And then you crunch the numbers, you're going to be like, that's probably not going to work. Let's try 61. Let's try 62. Let's say maybe you're a little bit more aggressive with your investments. And we come up with a kind of a range of numbers that are reasonable. And when we come up with that range, we can do what's called a sensitivity analysis. So we can say, okay, what if we worked 1 fewer years of employment, or what the difference between how much we made and what the inflation rate was, or inflation rate changes. Okay, so sensitivity analysis means that we change each variable and see how that variable changes the end result. So for example, 20 to 19, 3% or 3.5%. We just try all these different things and we get different scenarios, see how they impact it. Okay. So here is when BJ is 45 years old, planning. You can read all that. Okay. So step 1 of this problem is determine his needs, and so on. Okay. So after we were to calculate all of that, scenario 1 basically doesn't work. Scenarios 2, 3, and 4, and 5 illustrate how we can change things. So for example, this is what you would be doing often with your clients. You say, well, you know what? Maybe you'll have to work 3 more years. Or maybe we assume we're going to get a better return, and we change it from 6 to 9%. Or we combine those two. Or maybe we say, look, you have some land right now, okay? So maybe we sell that land. Or you have a boat, we sell it and we put that money and put it towards an investment for the retirement plan. Okay? So you end up with all these different scenarios here. And you increase investment return, more years working, you sell an asset, so and this is what your Money Guide Pro will help you do, is give different scenarios. Then your client can say, you know what, I don't really want to work anymore, but I'm willing to sell this land that I'm not really using at the moment. And that's what you as a financial planner can help them be thinking about options for how to fund their retirement. So another very common retirement planning tool is a tool called Monte Carlo analysis. So you need to know what that is. We're not going to do the actual calculations ourselves, but we're going to have our financial planning software do it. And what it does is it takes like all of these variables and says, okay, what if we made this 18 or up to 24? And then it would pick one of those numbers in there, and it would also take inflation and say, okay, what if it was 2? What if it was 4? And what if we sold something? Whatever. It could do it 1,000 times is what Financial Money Guide Pro will do. And it'll show you, okay, out of those 1,000 times, 87% of the time we're in the green, we're good. The other 13% it failed. So right now that's a pretty good, probability of success is really good. But it could be that you're going to run it, when you run it for your group project, I'm going to have you input numbers and you're going to be down here and you're going to have to figure out what could you do to make those numbers become much more positive. All right. So how can we manage retirement distributions? One way is to get an annuity, which is typically sold by life insurance companies. It's a sum of money paid out to someone each year for the rest of their life, typically regardless of how long they live. So if you live over 90, they usually end up being really good deals. If you die in your 70s, usually not a good deal. Okay? Social Security is an example of an annuity. Pensions also are an example of annuities, simply meaning that they'll pay for the rest of your life. And this, by doing this, it reduces the risk of superannuation. But if you remember, that means running out of money. So this is good for risk-averse clients. Clients that are like, oh, I don't want to have any money in the stock market after I retire. I just want to make sure I get a fixed amount for the remainder of my life, and I should be good with that. Also remember that, and I already mentioned that. Here's our 4% rule. Okay? This chart that I have on your sheet is from Morningstar, and what they did is they back tested investments in stocks and bonds over like the last 100 years and try to figure out, okay, what withdrawal rate could you use, meaning like 4%, by asset allocation. So equity weighting is stocks. So this is saying 100% stocks, 10% stocks, okay? And they're saying, if you do this, at least historically, there's been a 90% success rate. So most clients you're going to deal with are going to have 30 to 40 years left. Well, actually, I take that back. You're going to have a lot of people that are coming to you with 10, 20 years. But I'm sorry, this 30 to 40 is how many years you have to live after you retire. Okay, so what I meant by most of your clients will say, look, okay, I'm going to retire and I'm going to assume I'm going to live another 30 or 40 years. So 30 years is the most common. So they turn 60, think they're going to live to 90. What is the most common withdrawal rate? Well, if you look right here, if you use 40%, you would have like 40% in stocks, 60% in bonds. And you could be 90% successful in taking out, having money, your money last for 30 years if you took out 4% a year. Another approach is to use, I'll call it more the bucket approach. And another word for bucket, the technical term is tranches or increments. And what this does is you say, okay, for my next 5 years in retirement, I want to make sure I have money to eat and live and pay my bills, and I can accept a much lower required return, and I'm going to have my money in what we call money markets or very secure investments, because I got to make sure I can't take any risk with it because I've only got a time horizon of 5 years. For my next 5 years, I can go a little bit riskier, a little bit riskier, a little bit riskier, keep going. When I'm, and I can keep turning these buckets over. I'm always having, and this is my percent of capital, how the book breaks it down. They're saying, okay, 6% of your money could be in pretty risky stuff. Here's stocks also. So this is saying like 13% could be in that. And you just balance fund or stocks and bonds. So anyway, my point is you don't have to get caught up in all of this for now, but it's just saying that instead, you could have your money in buckets. This is kind of what David, who came and talked to you, their firm, they kind of have 3 buckets. So it depends on the firm in terms of how they do these. So the key thing with retirement, 1, figuring out how much you're going to need. 2, figure out how to get there. And then 3, figure out how you are going to invest it so that you have enough to last while you live. And that's what financial planning, a lot of it comes down to. And that is it for Chapter 11.